Thank you. Can you hear me at the back?
Yes.
Yeah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Wonderful to be with you here. Kindly consider all protocols observed. So, this is a remarkably important, significant day today, ladies and gentlemen, because we're discussing an iconic admiral, a great national hero, a great Maratha,
That's right.
a fantastic naval commander, and much more. He's a man of many parts. So Sohail, before we start our discussion, just to sort of get you updated with, and a lot of our distinguished guests here, the Maritime History Society, as you know, has been doing a lot of wonderful work, but much of its work, incidentally and nicely coincidentally, has been steered by three great sons of Maharashtra. You know, one is Admiral Avati. You must have heard that name frequently.
Yes.
He is the person who sort of founded, he is the patron saint
Of the MHS.
of the MHS, and you keep hearing a lot of him and about him. Admiral Nadkarni, who was the chief, who was equally a great history enthusiast, a near contemporary of Admiral Avati, a huge history person.
Right.
And we are fortunate that his son, also Admiral Ravi Nadkarni, is with us today for this talk. And the third, ladies and gentlemen, not many of you may be aware, but Unithan sir is here. One of the remarkable person who did a lot for the Maritime History Society was a gentleman called Wing Commander Mukund Naravne. Okay? Now this is an Air Force officer who, after retirement, took to maritime history, and on a rickety old Lambretta scooter, he went around the entire Konkan coast, writing about the coastal Maratha ports.
I did not know that, but I have used his book extensively.
Yes.
He's written on every coastal
He's written
fort.
on every coastal fort. So this is Wing Commander Naravne. Why I'm bringing him in, ladies and gentlemen, we lost him. He passed away just about a month and a half ago. But in good tradition of Maharashtra, his son, General Mukund Naravne, went on to become the army chief and retired a couple of years ago. So since many in the audience may not have been aware of General Naravne's contribution, I thought I'd bring that.
Yes, a very significant one.
You are writing about a great Maratha, a great hero of Maharashtra. How did this book start? And this from a person, I mean, you've written what Soumya rightly calls a master class, right? How did this begin from a person who had never heard of Kanhoji Angre?
Thank you very much for having me here. It's a privilege, absolutely. And finding out about Kanhoji Angre and getting to write about it is a story in itself. And when I was actually researching a children's book and was looking for a piratical character here who had lost his treasure, and that was it. I was just looking for someone with the treasure. And I came across Kanhoji Angre. And there was a discrepancy because also the only other institution I knew that was named after Kanhoji Angre was INS Angre. And but here he was being portrayed as a pirate. So I got a little suspicious, wanted to see what was happening, and I started doing my research. And what I came across was, at some level, a travesty in our history. As a student of history, I did not know Kanhoji Angre, and he is someone every Indian, even outside Maharashtra, every Indian needs to know about a person like him, know him especially, and what he did almost 300 odd years ago. He was actually a beacon, an example, and instead he has been vilified for most of history, and he continues to be vilified in the West. And I think other than the Navy, he gets very little support, and this is quite unfortunate. So I just thought that I had to tell the story.
So So it's a story that sort of happened. You were convinced about and as you read about him, you became even more and more convinced about his legendary status, so to say.
Absolutely. Then I spent a lot of time doing research, and we were so separated by time. There was not that much material available. But I went through everything, and fortunate enough to meet someone who's in the audience today, Rakhy Angre,
yeah.
And he was also very helpful. And a lot of information I got from him was able to draw his character out. And I think that was also an important part in resurrecting him. And
so, for a debut novel, you have got rich praise. Amitabh Ghosh, who's a man whose historical writings, most of his books are imbued with historical writings, calls it an ambitious attempt to evoke the maritime world of the Konkan. And Shashi Tharoor says absorbing saga, hails an excellent debut. So in cricketing parlance, you scored a century on debut.
Oh.
And this was launched at the Jaipur Lit Fest, so
That's right.
You can't ask for better. But Sohail, when we talk about Kanhoji, you can't do that without talking of the Chhatrapati, because Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, in a way, it provides that sort of initial, let's say, prologue or prelude to Angre's story itself. And we are, of course, in the 350th year of the commemoration of the Chhatrapati's ascension to the throne.
Right.
And in that very first chapter of yours, towards the end, you write very, very beautifully. This is the chapter called The Last Sankhpal,
Right.
Which is the Angre surname until then. And I'm taken up with what you say in the conversation between Tukoji and Chandru, where Chandravanshi says, at last someone is finally bothered about the Konkan, Chandru. I hear Rajay plans to rule from Raigad Killa. That means his heart is still in the Malvan and Konkan. We are amidst a new age, Chandru, a golden and prosperous one. If only I can bring the child into it, the Sahib says. And of course the child comes later.
Yes.
But this is a brilliant way to talk of what the Germans call as the Zeitgeist, the spirit of those times.
Yes.
So you are heralding that, and your first chapter begins with that. So tell us a little bit about what you think of Shivaji and that leading into Angre.
Chhatrapati Shivaji was absolutely changed the game in the Deccan. Of course, we know his father was the Senapati of Bijapur, as was Kanhoji Angre's grandfather, also working in the Bijapur army. But when Chhatrapati Maharaj came with the concept of Swaraj, it was a totally new thing. It was no more dependence on either Bijapur or the Mughals. We all know of Aurangzeb and Shivaji Maharaj's animosity, but we don't know how, very few people know how much Aurangzeb respected Shivaji Maharaj. And his main goal was to get Shivaji Maharaj as his Senapati. If that would have happened, he would have been able to conquer, I think, right down to,
Kanyakumari. Anyway.
Yeah. But Shivaji Maharaj stopped him dead in his tracks. And of course, after that, after Aurangzeb's death, we saw what is now being more and more people find out about is the lost Maratha century, when the Marathas ruled from Attock to Cuttack, as they say,
Yes.
and were the de facto rulers of most of India. And Shivaji Maharaj was also a template for Kanhoji Angre. He has remained very loyal to the Bhosle clan, and he emulated Shivaji Maharaj in a lot of ways. Shivaji Maharaj was also very different in his personality from other kings of the time.
Yes.
Compassionate, meritocratic person, which was very rare.
Not discriminating.
Not discriminating.
We'll talk about that template because you actually call him Samudrata Shivaji. So we'll talk about that part, the template. I think that's a very, very important point you raise. So, but You know, incidentally, I was born and brought up in Bijapur, so the resemblance is completely coincidental. But right. Bijapur figures a lot in your book.
Yes.
Now, one of the persons who's also endorsed your book is Surgeon Commander Uday Kulkarni. Ladies and gentlemen, again we're sitting in Ashwini Auditorium. One of the finest historians of the Marathas is actually a retired Surgeon Commander. Surgeon Commander Uday Kulkarni. Please read his books. You said that yes. He helped you a great deal,
yes.
And he's handsomely endorsed your book too. Now, as you said, it's the Maratha century, and Uday Kulkarni keeps talking of the Maratha yes. century frequently.
Yes.
Within that Maratha century, I would like to believe that there was a century of the Maratha Navy. Right. That begins somewhere in 1657 when Chhatrapati does his first naval construction, launches his first ship,
yes.
and goes on 1756 till Vijayadurga and Angria happened.
That's right.
So that's about a century of the Maratha Navy.
Yes.
You know, so I've constantly told him that that should be the subtext within his thing. Now, undoubtedly, the star of this century of Maratha Navy is Kanhoji.
That's indisputably.
Now, one of the things that I really loved your book was, because most of us who are acquainted in some way with Angre, right. start getting acquainted with him from the last decade of the 17th century, from the time he becomes a Sarnobat and then Sarkhel and all that. You know?
That's right.
His early days, his childhood is lost in mists of memory. In fact, Manar Volgaonkar calls it cobwebs around a legend in his book.
Yes.
You know, now you have tried to unpack those cobwebs, probably a bit of historical fiction there,
right.
but it's beautiful. So bring little Kanhoji Angre, or the first 15-20 years of Kanhoji Angre to life in your this way. Just tell the audience.
I wanted to. I was just thinking about how did such a man come to be. And you know, it's always in our childhood. That's where we were, when we were educated and our personality forms. And the earliest thing we know about his childhood is that his father made sure that he went to the best Gurukul in the Konkan, to Guru Joshi at Harnain, the same place where Balaji Bhatt was sent. And he was Chit Pavan teacher, guru, and his students were usually Chit Pavan, but he took all castes and of people into his Gurukul. So we do know that there was a lot of focus on his education. We do know that he loved his guns, the family loved their horses. They had been trying to breed horses always, I would say. And so I wanted to create, work back on a character. How did this man, who started very young, when Sambhaji Maharaj at the Battle of Padmadurg, he was just a young teenager, and when he was blooded, and so I was very keen to show how this character had formed. So I did mine everything I could, but I must say quite a lot of it was fiction. And there were certain stories I was told by the family, and I just wanted to put that into a practical perspective, given the way Balaji Bhatt thought, given the snake incident.
Yes, the hooded snake.
The hooded snake incident, this is a very important trope in India, when the Sheshnag, it is a sign. And so I wanted to bring both of those into the forefront, that yes, he was a marked individual, marked by destiny,
yes.
but also by certain practicalities, which we may think 400 years ago was a magical time, but as it's always nuts and bolts that gets you across.
Absolutely, and I love the way you have sort of etched those nuts and bolts everywhere. I mean, I'll come to that, but be it description of nature, be it description of the maritime sort of arena, the amount of detail you put into those nuts and bolts or describing weapons, all that is lovely. But if we move from what you had spoken about, I think one of the very, very interesting things about Kanhoji that emerges early on is that maybe he is a son of Konkan, he is breathing the sea air, but he recognizes early on that the sea is a different medium. That to fight on sea, you got to do it differently than from doing it on land. You mentioned Padmadurg, his early initiation, Anjali, where they sort of gain and lose
again.
And you have these very lovely conversations where the Maratha generals are saying, these damn boats don't behave like horses, they don't turn like them. Because there is a kind of, the rest of the generals are generals on land who are looking to replicate that on water.
Yes.
On the other hand, Kanhoji is a man born to the water, so to say.
He was born and trained also. He actually had trained at Mahad. He had worked with the Siddhis. His father had realized that even Shivaji Maharaj's one, the Darya Sarang, was a Siddhi, and the other, of course, was Menak Bhandari. But he was trained with the Siddhis, so he had great appreciation and knowledge of how vessels worked, how the tides worked, the lay of the sea, as you say, the lay of the land. He was well aware of that is what he used against the European ships, with their large drafts, how he would ambush them, use sandbanks, and one thought that these little canoes and boats would be ineffective against massive galleons. But he had a perfect understanding on how either a brown water navy can function or a blue water, though he hadn't gone out yet, though he started towards the end building large piles.
Yes.
He was also equally efficient on land. They used to say, he can't do anything beyond the beach. But then when he marched on Satara and surprised them, and that really shook them up. Of course, at the heat of Balaji Bhatt, and which made them, it was a ruse. But he was able to also separate his Siladars from his navy, different training, different practice, because I think Padmadurg hurt him.
It hurt him.
It hurt him, it changed him, and it really made him think as to why they lost. And he, I think, really meditated on those facts and came up with a lot of new inventions. I think in your last post you talk about the stitched ship, which was the, how they did it then. But he realized that not only do we have to put the cannon at the prow,
you need nails.
You need nails to have a steady deck.
Yeah.
So,
so what you said in a way proves that naval admirals can succeed on land, but it's not necessarily true that army generals succeed on sea. But I'm so glad you mentioned about trade, because one of the things that navies constantly we tell even today, that guys, please recognize that navies are important not just merely for defense or power projection, but for protection of trade. That's how we are fundamentally different from the Army and Air Force. And I'm glad you mentioned about how Kanhoji saw not just the requirement of trade, but the close relation between, say, trade and maritime security. And therefore he trained with whoever could teach him the tools of that trade. And if that included Siddhis, why not? So they were great pragmatists. The Marathas were always great pragmatists. So the Siddhis, now again, that tells you in a bit, they're Habishis. And it is sad that Abyssinia, Ethiopia, today doesn't even have a coastline after Eritrea sort of became a separate country. But in a way, it can tell you that seafaring is also a memory chip in your DNA. You lose it for a couple of generations and a couple of centuries. No one today talks of the Habishis as seafarers. So some of the history things that you bring out is so interesting. So let's now go from he started.
Yes.
He defends Suvarnadurg against deceit,
Right.
and that marks his rise.
Yes.
He's appointed as the deputy Sarkhel, so to say,
Yes.
and he starts his journey of fame.
Yes.
Now that part most of us know, but some of the things that you have brought out are his sterling different qualities, you know, his austerity, simplicity, his fight with his wife that she wants a bigger house and more this one, but this man is wanting to invest in security, or he's interested in paying well. Everything that he earns, he passes amongst the people who've served him. So there is a remarkably different person here as a leader, as a strategist, as a tactician. Can you share some of your thoughts of him in this phase when he starts making giant strides? And this is the time when everyone starts getting afraid of him now. As Balaji Vishwanath says, everyone has heard of you now. They are in terror of you.
Yeah. Well, he was very different for his age. You know, at that time it was a system where you paid, you brought your, 10, 20 people, and or you paid for like the Mughal system of having X amount of horses, and you were had to take care of them, and it was done for profit. Here was a deputy commander who was not interested in profit. He was actually interested, which was very different for the age, of creating some kind of infrastructure here also. He spent on bridges, on wells, on building ancillary forts to defend primary forts. He set up a system of signals using fireworks based out of Sagargarh. No one could enter the Konkan without him knowing. And it would reach all the way down to Vengurla, within the day. And he started innovating. And when he would take a ship, he would also take their logbooks. He was a very curious person. He wanted to know everything. How the foreign traders worked, what they did, what were their advantages, what were the advantages of their cannon. He became obsessed with getting bronze cannon. Because he just realized that they work much better on the sea. So standardization of gunpowder. The other Maratha Sardars were so eager for his gunpowder because it was just safer. And these almost industrial revolution kind of, he was 100 years, had come up with those things 100 years prior to this.
No, I think I'm so glad you mentioned, because Admiral Avti also in one of his essays says that Kanhoji Angre was perhaps the only man who could think like Shivaji did. He had a strategic vision that far exceeded the limits of his time.
Yes.
And I think many of the things that you have talked about him, his curiosity, his fantastic knowledge of weapons, guns,
yes.
Of the difference when you are shooting from a moving target and hitting a moving target,
right.
Of him telling his people to aim for the mast or the rudder.
Right.
I mean, that's a fantastic tactical acumen,
Yes.
So here is a man who's he's a hard taskmaster. He's drilling his people all the time, unlike the other
Yes.
Subedars and Kiledars, keeping them drilled, keeping them constantly at work.
Yeah, which
no
is
rest.
like a standing army system.
Absolutely standing army. And he's paying for that. He's maintaining
out of his pocket.
Out of his pocket,
Yes.
at least initially, till he starts making money from the dastak. And then at the same time, he's also welfare oriented in terms of wells, in terms of, also he doesn't kidnap children for work. I mean, he's, as you said, remarkably like Shivaji, that while he brings cunning to war,
Yes.
there is also a certain ethical, moral core about him. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. At that time we had a system of pressing the local villagers into labor. He always paid for his labor. Most people would have minted a gold coin.
Yeah.
He minted, he got a Bijapuri coinsmith to mint a Bijapuri coin that was counterfeit proof, and if you cut some silver off, it would be caught, and it was just the Alibagi Rupaya, what it's known as now, to increase the flow of cash. I mean, there was so much, so it was not trying to hoard cash, but compound it, through circulation. And all kinds of people, he caught shipbuilders from everywhere he could, and absorbed technology very quickly.
So, absorb technology very quickly. One of the sentences that I like that you have particularly said, I mean, there's so many that I've liked and marked. I mean, this book is full of my annotations. But what I liked is, again, what I told, he saw things differently. And there is this conversation happening with Angria and him. And he says, that was then anyway, now it's a Maratha possession currently under Babanji Mohite. And that is when he says, today the game has changed with Firangis and all the Angrezi and Topika traders coming in and making their fortified godams along the entire coast where their cargo is stored. Today you need to control the waters. The forts are just your bases and dry docks. We need to be out there on the sea, making our presence felt and reminding them these are our waters. I mean, this is remarkably prescient, There are many things that he is telling or you are telling through him. One is the need to be out in waters, that battles there have to be fought on the sea.
Yes.
And secondly, also the concept about sovereignty of waters.
Right.
So, in many ways, you will agree that when he started issuing his dastaks and calls, it was not merely about making money, it was about the sovereignty of the Marathas. He actually printed it under the name of the Chhatrapati.
Yes.
So this was for the first time someone from India
yes.
was standing up to the Firangis, to the Angres and all that, and saying you will go only if you have my dastak. So it was not just a challenge to the navy, it was also an assertion of the Maratha sovereignty, and therefore an understanding of statecraft and sea power. Again, would you go along with that?
Absolutely, sir. It was not only, again, profit-based. The dastak didn't just mean the 2.5%
yes.
what you took. It was earlier, prior to this, when he started off, if a Portuguese ship crossed you, you had to drop your sails, pull up your oars. By the time it was 30 years into his reign, they were doing that to the Maratha vessels. So if you saw a Maratha vessel, you would, even a Portuguese galleon would drop its sails, and allow customs inspectors to come on board. So he was able to change that.
And that's remarkable for people who were horribly cruel and who would cut off people's body parts if they didn't so much as listen to them.
Yeah.
And now they were dropping their sails.
So dropping their sails, and they took to traveling in large convoys once or twice a year up to Daman and Diu, because if they traveled alone, they were likely to get checked.
One of the things that you have said is the likeness between Kanhoji and Chhatrapati. Of course, you see him operationally in terms of what he has done, and you call him the Samudracha Shivaji. In your story, in fact, in that tale where he kills the Siddhi petrol at about the time that Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj passes away,
Right.
You suggest that Chhatrapati's soul, Atma, has entered Kanhoji. But later on, when Kanhoji has captured the Portuguese ship,
Yes.
and he has their governor and Manuel, I like the way you say Manuji to Dom Manuel, but he is talking to him when that guy says, I can join you.
Yes.
And says, look Manuji, I have modeled my protectorate on the lines of our great King Chhatrapati Shivaji. Neither he nor I have looked upon a soldier's caste or creed. We only seek ability and talent. That is why all of you are still alive, unlike your gunners and laskars. You, I had no hope in joining us the way you conducted yourself, but I need gun captains who can aim and conduct my gunners. So here you see on the one hand, this for the most of the time, non-castes, reasonably secular, flying the Swarajya banner, but getting maximum support.
Yes.
At the other time, a pragmatist who believes in taking European help where it is needed.
Yes.
And at the third, realizing the need to bridge that technology gap, which is why he needs the help of the Topikas, the Firangis, the Angres.
Right.
So, in many ways, this is very much what Shivaji was in a different era. I mean, just a few years before, but that's exactly how Shivaji conducted it.
Yes, yes. So I think, they say like when you have bhakti, that's why you have bhakti towards your deity, so that you start embodying those characteristics. So I think he did hero worship Shivaji Maharaj and did end up becoming a lot like him and taking on all the good qualities that were able to, of course, grow the Maratha Empire. I think he was able to do the same, and he did become the dominant, absolutely dominant force from Cochin to Surat for not only the last 30 years of his life, but also till 1756, when his two sons fought each other, quite frankly. I mean, Tulaji and Manaji. And the British supported the Nana Sahib, and the British were on one side, and Tulaji was destroyed.
We'll talk about that separately. Because that's a very sad chapter. We have to talk about it. But so to go back, I like the way you see these clear relationships between maritime security and the country's prosperity. And a sense of geography. I mean, at some point, the same geography that you mentioned, at some point of time, he's saying from Surat to Sri Lanka or Lanka or something, that they have an idea that much coast, if his ambition permits him, must be under his control.
Right.
So, one of your chapters called Saltpeter, it has nothing about Kanhoji Angre. But I think it is a master class in maritime security, because you have these merchants in Bombay coming and discussing after the incident of Ramaji's father, Narayan Kamath, being killed at sea and Venkoji being abducted. Now, so everyone wants maritime security, and they're saying, the English can't seem to provide, the Siddhis can't seem to provide, and without maritime security, we traders can't do anything. So I like that, and I like, again, the deep way in which you have gone into making of barud, into the guns, into technology and all that. So you invoke the sense of what were the concerns of not just Kanhoji Angre, but the rest of the people at that time. Now, how did you imagine that? It's easy for a naval officer to do it. Perhaps a historian, or how did you see all these interconnections?
Trade will, even on land, if you have armies passing through, there is massive destruction, and there's no tax to be had by anyone. So Kanhoji Angre always realized, and that is why he was okay with the Western traders coming in, because he knew they brought the gold and silver. And India was an exporting country. It produced 1/3 of the world's produce. So he also knew that it had to go out into the markets of the Middle East or Persia or China or Europe. So he realized that if there was no security, there were chances of people going elsewhere. And he wanted to make the western coast the most business friendly. Like, now we say business friendly environment. He was creating a business friendly environment back then, by providing security, by providing shipwrights and other facilities, and making Konkan a very business-friendly location.
Making Konkan a business-friendly location. I mean, it still continues to be the most prosperous coast in India.
Yes.
So in some ways, I guess it is that. Another thing I liked was your very, you sort of One, of course, you make people interested in history by using the terminology of those times. So people are forced to, though you're given a map, people are forced to go back and see. But I also like your sense of drawl, sort of wry humor. At one point when, Kanhoji Angre comes to Bombay or to Shaisti, Salset and Palwa or Apollo Bandar,
Yes.
you say, he heard that a Ferengi girl had married an Angre's boy and some rocks had been given in dowry,
Yeah.
This is one of the rocks we are sitting on at this point of time. This is one of the rocks we are sitting on. But, given sort of your exploration, not just of the Konkan, of the Desh too,
Yes.
but I'll come to that in a bit. There is a kind of high noon of the Maratha Navy,
Yeah.
which sort of starts declining after Kanhoji's demise.
Yes.
Not because his successors lack the courage, but probably that sort of administrative skill, diplomacy, the other intrigues that happen in the Maratha court,
Yes.
all of them collectively contribute. But I want us to talk, Sohail, a little bit, because this audience, many of them know, but many of them probably are not aware that the Maratha Empire's navy finally fell in very unique and unfortunately poignant circumstances.
Yes.
You had the Peshwa join hands with the British to defeat the Angres.
One brother.
One brother, Tulaji,
Yeah.
yes.
They joined Manaji against
joined
Tulaji.
Manaji, yes.
So basically the brothers themselves were,
They fought.
yeah, but they needed to be divided. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to take on the Angria might in the Konkan.
Of course, from a real politics point of view,
Yes.
for the British or even for the Peshwas, I mean,
Yes.
Uday Kulkarni says that look, it's a bit more complex than what you think. But to me, the fact that Suvarnadurg and Vijayadurg, 1755 and 1756, tell a very sorry tale. It is akin to the government fighting its own navy. The Peshwa gangs up or teams up with the British to fight the Angres.
Yes.
Now please see, Kanhoji Angre and Balaji Vishwanath are friends.
Friends, yeah.
The childhood friends. I mean, you of course bring in a lot about Balaji coming and giving lots of information in
Yes.
between and things like that. But the first Peshwa and the great Sarkhel are friends.
Friends, yes.
But subsequently, their families, between Tulaji and Nana Sahib Peshwa,
Right.
both probably very good characters, great characters among themselves.
Yes.
But there is this fight. So the house of Angres and the house of Peshwas decide. How is it? It's a military tragedy. It's a political tragedy, but I think it's also a human tragedy. I want you to weigh in a bit on this.
People always point to Battle of Plassey as a turn. A year earlier was the Battle of Angria.
Yes.
And Plassey wouldn't have happened if not for Angria hadn't happened. Clive wouldn't have had the money. He had lost his fortune going back, came back here to make and made it the loot of Vijayadurg. The Angres were so wealthy and there was so much looted that it set up several British aristocratic families. There was the Colonel Watson, who went on to become a lord. Admiral Watson, and went on to become a lord and a member of parliament. And they also changed the narrative against the Angrias. And the thing is, while the Angres were in power, they kept the coast secure.
Yes.
And they kept these people out, and they were in the position of traders. After that, after the fall of Vijayadurg actually, you see Clive realizing that now the way to move forward is by simply becoming a Jagirdar, and then using that as the starting point into India. But it happened at Vijayadurga.
It happened at Vijayadurga. Ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who probably missed the connection a little, what Sohail brings out very beautifully, you know, in this Battle of Vijayadurga, 1756, Admiral Watson is joined by a Colonel Robert Clive. Please note this name. He is the same man who appears 1 year later in Palashi in 1757. So, other than the money, it's also possible that Clive's ideas of dividing the top leadership, they do the same between Sirajuddaulah and Mir Jafar.
Right.
So, is it possible that Clive gets some of his ideas from Vijayadurga?
Definitely. He learned, he was actually a thug.
Yeah, I mean, he was a thug.
You know, he was a thug, and he came in, and I keep saying that about the European traders learned a lot when they came here, and became more sophisticated, became more political, and learned how to kind of play the game from us. And Nana Sahib Peshwa was a very intelligent man.
He was.
You know, he was also a mover shaker, and he had ways of means of dividing people, controlling, you know, making the correct alliances. So I think they did learn, he learned a lot from this battle.
He did. But I mean, for those of us in the Navy, we always look upon this as a great tragedy, you know, because perhaps the Maratha Empire ran for another 70 years till 1818, the Third Anglo-Maratha War.
Right.
But effectively, their control over the seas ended with Vijayadurga.
Yes, yes.
So for us, it is great tragedy. Before I take on audience questions, Sohail, I want to ask you one last question, which comes from your keen following of popular culture.
Yes.
You've been an advertising man, a writing man, and you and I have spoken several times about the representation in popular culture.
Yes.
And Angria himself is shown as a pirate, he is misrepresented. You have talked of everything from the Pirates of Caribbean to Indiana Jones. Yes. And all that. Talk us a little bit through on this misrepresentation that happens in the West and in popular culture, and a little bit more on what we need to do. Like, for example, you talk of having a stamp for Kanhoji. Other than the Navy, what should the rest of India do to preserve Kanhoji's memory? Just both questions, if you can.
Well, it would be wonderful if the ASI get involved. You know, small things by having plaques. If you go to Europe, you know, every little thing will have a plaque telling you about the history. Places that are associated with Kanhoji Angre, especially his forts, I think we need to focus on, for example, at Vijayadurga, there can be a plaque, you know, about the wall, about the ancillary forts, things like that. Maybe
the light and sound shows,
like Sohail Lumiere show.
Yeah.
So that is all that is really missing, and even in Mumbai or across in Mandwa or Alibag, I think we need to do more. Get the different departments involved, because quite frankly, sir, other than the Navy, I don't see anyone paying attention to him. There is hardly any mention in the textbooks,
yeah.
And he was a shining beacon of how forward-thinking, how ingenious Indians could be, have been, were 300 years ago. And I think there's been a deliberate process by, you know, the colonizing forces to paint us as Eastern despots, brutes, you know, not capable of logical thought, practicality, when actually this, here is an example that flies in the face of everything. So they conveniently turned him into a pirate. You know, now he is Sambhaji Angre, yeah, is in the Pirates of the Caribbean, and they have ridiculed the character. He's not, you know, we can look at Mr. Angre here, handsome man. That is not the portrayal of the, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So it is derogatory.
Absolutely.
You know, we just kept him at that thing of a pirate, not as a naval tactician or one of the greatest subedars of the Konkan, also a great governor. So that is sad, and I think we need to have a little bit of a push, you know, because it changes our impression of ourselves, and I think that is very important now.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned this. Of course, again, last time both Kurush and you said nobody other than the Navy has done a lot, and of course, I think we are happy to celebrate, commemorate his memory. I think also the characterization as a brown water Navy is somewhat unfair because he didn't have a choice, you know. He was fighting half a dozen
Yes.
people, the Portuguese, the English, the Siddhis.
And usually three at a time.
And three at a time. And India, the servants of Wadi.
Yes.
And this when the Marathas were fighting on land too.
That's right.
Probably no other contemporary kingdom has fought so many battles at the same time and come out trumps and actually, as they say, gone from Katak to Atak and ruled the seas. So, ladies and gentlemen, on that count, we've exactly done 45